Hello everyone. Today is Sunday the 15th of May 2022. This is the Eastern meeting number 109, the Desiderata Extinctionati. We had a topic planned today, but it might be an open conversation. We'll see what happens, as usual. Who wants to start? Anybody has something to say first before we start the conversation?
I wanted to just touch on going back to Hugh's ufology. Uh, I don't think it will take us that long. It was basically a question which is to do with why he raked up this subject and focused attention on it. And I just sort of want to clarify with people what their idea was on why Hugh focused attention on this. And also, just related to that, of course, is the fact that there was suddenly a lot of media attention. These reports being released in the US, they're confirming that after all these years, government agencies are confirming that, oh yes, these were sightings that were taken very seriously, and we think there's something in it. After years and years of either denial or debunking it, or explaining it away by some, the weather balloon uh, kind of thing, they're finally admitting that there's something in it. Now, my understanding is that Hugh felt that they were um, sort of resurrecting this UFO thing and giving it a certain gloss of legitimacy uh, as a vehicle for to get going as the general collapse of societies comes on, as a thing to distract people's attention. Um, and Also, it worked in, of course, probably to certain points of view about, the religious points of view, the second coming, or aliens coming to rescue certain select human beings and take them off the planet, and all those various things of course, you've probably heard about. Um, so uh, there was that side of it. Probably behind why Hugh was bringing this up. And related to that was the fact that what he spent some time discussing was that the sort of going into the experiences of these Air Force pilots and similar people who had supposedly seen UFOs, and explaining the how certain states of consciousness induced under very stressful circumstances can lead to psychic and visual phenomena that would lead people to believe they've seen something, and it could be strong enough to actually be manifesting materially in some way. So there was all of that, but which Hugh went through in his videos. But what intrigued me, that I noticed, that once this war started, uh, between Russia, well, nominally between Russia and Ukraine, but I think it's, a sort of a proxy war between the West and Russia at this stage. Um, that once this came on, all of this UFO stuff just seemed to vanish. There's no mention in the media, nothing showing up on YouTube, nobody. It just seemed to have just been dropped very suddenly, which uh, I'm kind of wondering whether, uh, I don't know how you want to put this, but, with the deep state, or whoever, whatever conspiracy theory about who's controlling the Earth you want to subscribe to, whether they decided that it was going to be a better scam to put a war on to distract everybody's attention and while behind the scenes they're doing their own thing, it'd be better to use a war as that strategy rather than to use uh, a resurgence in UFO appearances. So I just wanted to sort of ask, what the others might think about the question of, why we suddenly had this recognition of UFOs and now suddenly that's gone. I guess that's basically my question.
That's brilliant, Gary. I really understand what you're saying, and I really see what Hugh was saying about that. But I think, Jason, you might have something to add to this.
Well, it was very interesting to see Hugh go in that direction quite suddenly after steering the discussion towards revealing his interest in the flippening and developing with the group the manifesto, which is a very long document. And in that manifesto, UFOs are mentioned only twice as a error of a possible error that people might make due to effects of changes in climate and magnetic fields. It comes up in my recollection. I'm not looking at it. And what was just a single reference in that manifesto, he then enlarged on in, I think, more than one session in December, January, February. I don't recall when it really started, his discussion of UFO, and then it was kind of like he was in advice mode on several times. He repeated. He said, if a ship, a vessel comes down claiming to be an alien ship, don't get on it. I think that's the right advice I'm giving you. Could be the wrong advice, but he went on and on about that, and that was sort of entertaining. And he did introduce the idea that some of this, or a lot of this, could be a mass psychological manifestation. Indeed, he introduced mass psychological manifestation. I don't know if that's the correct term. There's a number of different terms for it. We call it mass hysteria or mass psychosis. He didn't use those terms, but those are related concepts. That we could be actually manifesting an illusion of a certain condition. But he had already covered over in the immediate period that he released the flippening, but also very much earlier on, there's several references to the fact that he believes that we are alone in the universe. He's not someone who believes that there are other advanced civilizations. And, I'm just covering over stuff that's pretty evident in Hugh's sort of body of work. I share that view. And he covered over pretty much that a lot of the seemingly government UFO stuff.
We can't hear you, Jason, anymore.
Just go back a sentence or two if you can, Jason.
You can hear me. So I was just saying that much of the UFO stuff out there, he had said, was government disinformation to distract us and make us believe that advanced technology programs of the military are, they'd rather have us believe these are little green men or unexplained phenomenon, that they are test programs for advanced technologies. And so, and I think it's on record that the government has encouraged UFO, little green men theories, in order to distract people from defense programs. I think he also acknowledged that there is the U.S. in the last 10 years has developed, and other countries too, the idea of a space defense force or a space military, a whole new branch of militarization for space, which is extremely regrettable. And that the promulgation of UFO concepts very much serves the interest in drumming up support, unconscious support in the population for simple acceptance of yet more military dimensionality and growth into space. So I mean, we have a space force. It sounds like a joke. It sounds like something out of a Austin Powers movie. I mean, we have a U.S. Space Force in uniforms, and so it just goes on and on. I'm kind of just covering over stuff, and I think that what interested me about Hugh's work is he used for the first time I heard the word octave, that there's an octave of worldviews, or that, and it went with his recent, and maybe you guys can date this more in a more detailed way. He was talking about this musical analogy of do, re, mi, fa, so, and we're in a certain chord, we're in a certain key that has meanings. And there's only 2 or 3 other people I've ever heard to advance that, other than Pythagoras, or to modern critical thinkers who are speaking in that analogy. So I've said a lot, but Gary, does this cover over some of the background that you have in mind on this?
Yeah, you actually brought up a couple other things which we could go into, but yeah, the octave, I think, was related to the kind of parallel to the I think to the chakra energetic systems of the body, and that there was a significant step, do, re, mi, and then there was and then you're into like the central chakras, and it represents a leap into a more energetic realm from a more physical, um, dense kind of energy and more physical realm. But yeah, just when you were talking there, a couple of things that I was thinking of, which is sure, we've got the mass distraction, and I would like to get back to that in the conversation, because this is basically my question: is have they simply given up on UFOs as a mass distraction and decided to go for World War III instead? And the other thing, though, is regarding what you said about the Space Defense Force and the UFOs as a cover for advanced technology testing, is that uh, uh, this could be I mean, you get the impression that some of the people involved in this were sufficiently, I don't know what the word is, deluded is not quite the right word, but they were sufficiently sucked into it, that they might be thinking that, you know, if they've got to the point where they really believe in these aliens and this higher technology, that possibly part of their agenda is, well, if we can get hold of their technical capabilities, then this might be the way we can save the world. That we can transcend our problems by the use of technologies that we don't currently have. So that is a point that just sort of came to my mind while you were talking there, and yeah, I mean, my basic thing was, it just occurred to me one day that we have gone from a situation where there's this of a resurgence of mentioning and discussion about UFOs, and it's just seems to have, just in my personal experience at any rate, it just seems to have completely vanished again. It's just gone quiet. Uh, and the I don't know, because I mean, you don't know what is going on in the machinations of minds of people who are triggering large global events. Um, whether and I mean, this gets back to the discussions we had about conspiracy theories with Hugh as well, is whether UFO awareness was being deliberately pushed as a strategy, and then did they then decide that, well, it was going to be better to push war as a strategy, and then actually go as far as creating one. So yeah, I mean, that's just just all I can think of at the moment regarding what you said. But there's a lot in that. Um, just kind of perplexed at the moment. I think everybody is as to the significance of events now, um, and the significance of the UFO thing going back, a few months ago when it was being mentioned a lot.
I think Hugh liked analogies and symbols very well, very much. I mean, and as you said, Jason, bringing up the UFOs subject just at the same time as the flippening that he called an hypothesis. Well, he still, I think still a very important thing to study. And I think there is somebody in our group that wants to invite or to make an expose in light of a Russian guy who's doing some research on that. It's always interesting to have more information about that. But to come back to the parallel, you know how he liked analogies, symbols, and how he always said that we had to pick our cults. And I think that the movement, the ufology movement, is in parallel with the emergence of new religions or reinforcing of old religions and cults in these times of collapse. And he always said, if there's a ship that comes to pick you up, don't go on that ship, because that's the end of you. He was also, as you said very rightly, very very adamant about the fact that we are alone in this universe. I mean, aware or convinced, and that's also fuels a lot of the things that are in the manifesto in terms of we need to survive because we're humans, because we are one experience. And I think all these points that you've made, Jason, go back to how Hugh needed to use a lot of these beliefs. You see, there's an enormous crowd that's distracted constantly for the last, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 years with this ufology thing, and who is spending an awful lot of energy on that, and who are looking at external forces that going to help them, a bit like the Christians or other cults who are looking outside in order not to look inside. And I think that's also something very important in Hugh's approach.
Yeah, there's a couple of critical theorists, more than a couple, who've made remarks to the effect that all conspiracy theory, these are broad generalizations, have as part or all of their root a utopian desire to escape the global system of capitalism, the global logic of capitalism. Because if you can have a conspiracy theory where it's all about chemtrails, or it's all about UFOs, there's some secret conspiracy. If you can have a conspiracy that it's all, controlled by the Illuminati, or it's all controlled by the deep state, or it's all fill in the blank, you have an empowering explanation as to why the world is the way it is. Hilariously, most of those conspiracies, if you were to grant them, you would be, you are, the end note of the sort of end logic of most of those conspiracies is there is no way out. In other words, we're in such a world of total control and domination that there's little or no way out. And so how does that give us agency? So, and it is all serving as a distraction from the real thing of which there may be no way out, which is we're stuck in this hyper marketized, hyper corrosive global capitalist logic, which no one person or group or banks or ethnic group or anybody is in charge of. This goes to one of the, it's a contradiction in Hugh's logic himself. Listen carefully. What did he say? He said on many occasions, they're not in control. He made the remark that in South Africa, a country he knows well, he said several times, if the white majority, the ruling whites, had simply said, okay, you take the controls, you take over, we concede, you go ahead. He made the point that the black South Africans would have tried to operate the nation state and found that they faced the exact same problems, other than the racial divide, the economic problems, the problems of distribution of wealth, etc. It would not have all been remedied on day one of them taking over. And this has been shown in almost all decolonization in Africa. In most countries, we're way past the point where you can continue to blame the British or the French or the Belgians or whoever was the previous colonist for the current problems in those countries. So Hugh had said both. He had promulgated odd conspiracies, I think, just as a LARP or he was a gamester. He was he said he's very LARPy at one point. He admitted that. So you can't really tell when he's just fielding something. But we have the paradox, and I'm not the first to point it out, that the most conspiracies that are deeply held, that go beyond a single historical incident, that are trying to be a global conspiracy, the end logic is that you are attributing a degree of competence, a spectacular degree of effectiveness and control to governments or some behind-the-scenes group, when we know for a fact they are not in control. They are literally juggling, what is the phrase? Juggling chickens and chainsaws, trying to keep their power, trying to reinforce their advantage. But they don't all agree with each other. World leaders do not all agree with each other. They don't get in some room. There's not some secret, fraternity. They are wildly competitive within organizations. They want to bring each other down and get the advantage and get each other in a half Nelson and preferably a full Nelson wrestling hold and maybe crack the other guy's neck. We're a murderous, competitive, collaboratively murderous species. And, people who think that, yes, Putin can be viewed as a creation of the U.S. and of NATO, either a passive creation, like our bungling of handling the winning, so-called winning of the Cold War in 89, 90, 91, we had a historic opportunity to get it right, and we got it wrong on every chord, and bungled the ability to make Russia and the former Soviet states into equally footed citizens, global citizens of the world. We, in many ways, reinforced the paranoia and the nationalism there. But, you can't blame all of Putin's actions on the U.S. It just doesn't fly. I mean, Putin is not a good guy. You do not want to be in Russia, I promise you. You do not want to be under Putin. It is not a happy place. And so you have to go back to values. They're the only anchor. And again, I've gone all over the map, but distractions at bottom, everything is a distraction for us on this group, from the fundamentals of collapsing systems, fundamentals of overshoot, the fundamentals of climate change, whose every signal now tells us that we're in an accelerative, self-reinforcing, abrupt climate change situation, for which all the scientists who are credible know that there's no easy solution. You can't just stop. Even if we stop using all fossil fuels tomorrow, which is not going to happen, it probably is not going to reverse. We're probably on a the rocks are already sliding down the hill. We loosened one. We had the agency to, in California along the coast, it's so friable that the highway department hires, every year they hire mountain climbers who have to volunteer and sign a waiver. And they're commissioned to go up and loosen the most likely stones, big rocks, to cause landslides, because they want to proactively cause landslides. And so I'm using this as a metaphor. Humans had the agency to use a lever to move a very big stone. It then causes a landslide. When that landslide gets underway, nobody has the agency to stop it. And that landslide continues along the California highway until it reaches the next equilibrium state, which is when a huge number of rocks descend upon a stretch of highway, and the highway crew is there to start cleaning them up. They've precipitated a landslide proactively to prevent it from coming down on people's heads. But it's just a little example of how you have all sorts of situations where humans have an agency to initiate a state that goes into a moment of disequilibrium. And during that moment of disequilibrium, all the technology in the world will not stop even just this 500 square meters of landslide from happening. We've had the agency to shift the climate, and the landslide has begun, and we don't know where it ends in some new equilibrium state. Will the new equilibrium state support us or any life forms? We don't know. We don't know where it's going to land, and there's no cleanup crew that can clean it up at the end. It's a war against entropy that we're engaged in civilization, a foolish war. So, again, I apologize, but all these things are threaded and relational, and we can try and focus on conspiracies while we ignore the fundamentals, and adjusting to the fundamentals that I just covered. That is the mental and psychological and spiritual task that this group has wrestled with, I think, very effectively under Q, and we're going to continue to wrestle with it. I think we're all clueful, and it will be interesting to involve and interview others who are similar.
I think we lost you there a bit, Jason, again.
Yeah, I was just saying can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm just saying that, this group is held together.
You're very muffled, Jason. You must have moved something there. Yeah.
How about now?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, all I'm saying is this group is held together in an exploration of the responses to collapse, to civilizational overshoot, to climate change, to the psychological consequences and civilizational consequences of the, if you will, the alien cortex as a main thread of explanation that Hugh initiated, and along with so many other related threads. And if we involve others who have a similarly expansive scope, such as George Socrates, I think it will be interesting. Anyway, I've rambled a lot. I've woven a lot of things together. I don't know if it's useful.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I'll go back a bit, just talk about some of the points you mentioned. I remember did mention the Fermi paradox a few times, and I don't know whether it was on a meeting or just a conversation that you and I had, but where we spoke about that. My take on this has always been that regarding looking out into space for some other being somewhere else, that actually we had the telescope around the wrong way, and that really, when we look out into supposed space or galaxies or whatever, we think that we're looking out into somewhere else. And I think, I mean, I don't know how to put this very adequately into terms that don't sound a bit silly, uh, but I think from a sort of spiritual point of view, um, we think that there's this out there where there might be other people, other beings and things, because we fail to recognize our own connection with everything. And so when we look out, we're not looking at something else. We're looking at parts of ourselves that we don't recognize are part of ourselves. And the extension of that is that the alien life, the extraterrestrials that we're looking for, they've been right here with us the whole time. We are what we've been looking for. So there's that way of thinking a little bit differently about the Fermi paradox, if it's not too way out for anyone to
I
entertain.
would.
And I go on, sorry.
Well, Gary, I'll be brief. That's absolutely brilliant. I mean, almost every aliens invading movie that you see, the this alien species has come to Earth and is now enslaving us and exploiting the resources and killing us. Well, that alien species is us. I mean, we are doing that. What we are doing is that which we attribute to evil aliens in every alien frickin' movie that Hollywood produces. I mean, it's just absolutely brilliant. We are the alien species, and within us, the alien cortex, I think, is what you're referring to.
Yes, I think when you look at it, you can see that he chose that name, to convey some quite a few different thoughts. Um, so yeah, it's rather clever, really. But I was thinking too about what you said about the if you take your belief in a particular conspiracy theory to an extreme, it sort of implies that you don't have any agency. And again, that implies the same mistake of dividing ourselves from everything else, is that we think that we should have agency over the rest of creation, or some ability to act upon it. And as there's all this struggle and frustration goes on with human beings physically and with the environment and also between each other. And I think, again, it comes down to, well, it actually came down, I think, I don't know whether we were specifically discussing the question of free will. The thing is, it's not that we either do have free will or agency or don't have it. It's the fact that if you are properly in union with existence, there's no need for it. It's irrelevant. The question doesn't arise, because what have you got will over yourself, or why do you need will or control or agency over everything if you are intimately connected with it all? I mean, this is where the Enlightenment sort of buggered everything up, because it's separated everything off. And we started to feel this disconnection, and then once you get disconnected, the whole question of will and agency comes up. So I don't know if I've explained that very well at all. I'll just while touching on the mention of conspiracy theory, I think here I was making a comment on Reddit just today or yesterday. Somebody posted, I think it was DB or somebody, and Hugh and I were talking about conspiracy theory as existing not by design necessarily, but simply by the way things were occurring as a matter of course, and the recognition that they were just developing in a certain direction, which would give you the impression that there may be some intention behind it. But in fact, it was just simply the outcome of the way things were going. And Hugh actually had a word for it, and I can't recall the word he used. And I've been just trying to recover this word. I thought it
Oh,
was his.
Gary, do you mean like how the mind like projects its patterns, like puts
Yeah, I
things
think
there?
that's the one. Yeah.
Oh, the word is apophenia or something like that.
Oh,
Uh,
apophenia. You
I,
could be right. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Because I'd forgotten it. Thanks for that. I actually thought it was an antidromia, but that's not quite the same thing. Apophenia. Yes, I think that's it. It's where, you know, you're seeing a pattern emerging, probably because we're prone, we're very, what's the word? We're very good at pattern recognition, in many different ways. And so, a certain sequence of events are occurring. You think, oh, hey, somebody's behind this. They're pushing the buttons here, making World War III, or there's something going on behind all this sudden publicity about UFOs. But in fact, there was no particular intention or causation. So, there's that background to bear in mind in thinking about conspiracy theory scenarios, I guess. Um, and in that sense, what Jason was just saying about Hugh saying, that these people behind the scenes who appear to be in control are not in control. Uh, and that's but from the outside they can appear to be in control. And as well, of course, they're also probably actively engaged in the process of propagandizing people to believe that they are in control anyway. So that's operating in two different ways there. And it was interesting, Jason, what you said about South Africa, about what would have happened if back during when apartheid was um, being challenged, if the blacks had been given the levers of power. And I don't know if Lionel Snell put up a couple of videos just very recently on the subject of populism, and he was talking about uh, why it is that populism seems to gain, well, a lot of popularity, why it seems to get more support than it deserves. And in his little talks there, if you want to check up on that, it's what's the name of his channel? It's Ramsey Jukes, isn't it? I think on YouTube, his channel, and he actually in part of his talk describes just what you're saying, that when these people do get, even now, not so much when apartheid was breaking down, but even to this day in South Africa, that they're discovering that now that they've got the levers of power, that they're tending to behave just the same way, all the corruption and failure to improve the society and all the rest of it that was occurring when when apartheid was in ascendancy. Um, I just this. Yeah, I might leave it at that because I've gone on for a bit too long. Does anyone else want to make a point there?
Yeah, I came in a little bit late, but yeah, what Jason was saying makes a lot of sense about the logic of the system, and using its own logic will lead nowhere. It's circular, and what people don't realize is it's like the culture itself is like an excrescence out of the collective consciousness of the entire, humanity. And so I think that's the reason why Hugh was always hammering on about doing the inner work, to meditate and become aware and enlightened, so to speak. I don't know exactly how to describe that phenomenon, but you kind of have to not go into it with the cultural conditioning. And people are using what they have, whether they're in power or using activism, and it's just not going to work unless they have the I don't know, the awareness of where all these things come from.
I'm actually engaged in correspondence with somebody who's on the edges of this group on just that point. I can't disclose any more, but I'm finding it difficult to get across just what you just said there now about the necessity to bring that deeper understanding into it, because otherwise you just don't really get anywhere.
Yeah, the whole thing, like Hugh said in the Globeki Tepe video, the whole logic of this entire system started with trade, and trade makes humanity an enemy of itself automatically because the whole point of trade is domination.
Trade
trade, yes, but also what I came to mind there, Gary, when oh Jesus, I'm so tired. I'm losing the thread of my thoughts. But and yeah, what you're talking about, the distraction, we're talking about the apophenia. I think I read so many interesting and listen to so many interesting people who are analyzing the current situation, whether deep state theories, whether the sabotaging of our society at the moment with the events in Ukraine, the COVID episode. There's enormous amount of talented writers. Some of them we have interviewed, like Paul Kingsnorth, or no, we tried to, or other people. But there is that central thing lacking in them that I mean, in spite of all the talent in their writing and their expose, they don't look at themselves. They don't look at our loss of connection. They're avoiding the real issue, and that's what I find difficult in selecting people to interview, because they all going on another direction, on another orbit. I can't really explain what I mean, but I think you might be able to translate and understand what I'm saying. We There's another thing that I wanted to add, and I'll let you continue. Is earlier, Jason and Gary, you mentioned the octave thing that Hugh brought in, and I really like to, maybe not in this meeting, but to go back on this, because I think this is a very interesting thing that he only touched, and I think that's quite fundamental.
Yeah, it is, because I mean, again, he was using that as an analogy, and I mean, Jason's mentioned that a couple of times. I think that the use of analogy, and I think uh, the you, you've got no choice but to speak in that way when you're dealing with the realm of what is there when the alien cortex isn't obscuring the sky, because uh, what you've got with the alien cortex is basically the nexus of language and thought. Now that means that once you want to leave the realm of words, to escape the alien cortex, you're then stuck as a spiritual teacher or somebody who wants to talk about this, because you've still got to use words to communicate to other people. And I think this leads into the use of analogies, and also, of course, Hugh was very interested, of course, in mythological accounts and there's symbolism involved in that, because that's the best you can do. If you either got to remain silent and say nothing, or you've got to move into a form of language which is less objective and rational and precise and clearly defined. You've got to move into a kind of a different realm. And I'm sure DB would have something to say about this, being someone who's uh, you know, appreciates the qualities of poetry. Is this is also a realm that works in the way mythological stories and the use of analogy and in language in trying to describe something, because it gets you away. I think, well, like Sophie was just saying, with some of the people, she's just saying that there's something, there's a central thing that you eventually end up bumping into every time, something missing there with them. They do really well, but then when it gets down to a nitty-gritty point, you can see that they're kind of stuck. And this is going back to what I mentioned a minute ago about the person I was communicating with, and I was aware that this was what was happening. Was there was nothing wrong with what this person was doing. The difficulty was that they couldn't see that they were coming from a mental position. They'd chosen a mental position, in other words, some ideology or some form of idealism about an outcome, and were holding on to that, and that was the impetus that was driving what they were trying to do. And what I was trying to say is, I'm not trying to tell you that what you are actually doing in the world is not appropriate, but it's coming from a place that requires you to kind of hold on to your alien cortex position and point of view. So what you're doing is got its foundations in a problematic place. I wish I could explain this a little bit better, because Hugh did also talk about, this idea of, well, not doing a thing, supposing, for instance, some kind of activism, and not doing it without necessarily being attached to the outcome, but you're simply doing it because it's the right thing to do. And that sounds great. And you think, oh yeah, sure, that sounds great. But I think it's kind of booby trapped, because you have to think that the right thing to do is probably is not going to be what your mind, your alien cortex decides is the right thing to do on the balance of all its logic and rationality and reasoning and all those. This right thing to do is going to be a kind of how would you call it? Outside of rational conceit. It's going to be the right thing is going to be sort of what arises within you once you just take your thought process out of the picture and let it come up by itself. It's not going to be something that's deliberately decided upon. I think this is what throws people, because they're expecting to be able to account for their decision to do this right thing. And if this right thing arises from outside of their alien cortex, and then somebody asks them about it, they're not going to be able to account for it. So that's I suppose they've got the feeling that it leaves them in an awkward situation. And I think you can See, I think he did relate some of the, those beautiful little um, Chinese tales and some of the to illustrate uh, some of these points. That you just uh, how are you doing a particular thing, not because you're holding on to a particular view about it. I don't know whether it's relevant, but the only one that comes to mind is the one about the two monks who were. This could have been Alan Watts anyway, not Hugh. The two monks who were walking along, and some young woman had got into distress, and one monk uh, immediately rushes over to save the woman from drowning or whatever it was, and puts her down on the bank, and then they just keep walking, and the other monk says, "Oh, you're a complete failure as a monk because you've broken your vow to have nothing to do with any female people, and the monk who done the rescue said, look, he said, you're basically said, look, I put that woman down 2 hours ago, and you're still carrying her with you in your mind. And I think his point was very much that the monk who rescued the woman, he just did the right thing, just like that. It wasn't a process of cogitation. No decisions were made. It wasn't a process that involved his alien cortex at all. Whereas the monk that was pretending to be all very righteous and pious was holding on to his piousness as a mental position. And of course, it was leading him to, well, certainly to misunderstand uh, where the right action came from. He was expecting that the right action would come out of um, his sort of liturgy of allowed actions in his mind, and things that were moral and things that weren't moral and all the rest of it. Uh,
Oh yeah,
so
yeah. I think basically the theme is like trying to leap ahead of the alien cortex. Yeah, where the monk is sitting there with those dictums or rules or whatever, and trying to contrive and follow them instead of leaping ahead of it and not calculating about it.
yeah, well, not even leaping ahead, but just sorry, I'm having a seniors moment too. Um, just letting go. I mean, realizing that you'll probably get a better quality outcome in whatever you're going to do if you actually sort of just let go of the process and let something happen. And it all, really so much of any genuine spiritual teaching comes down to this question of letting go. And it doesn't mean letting go of some particular thing. It just means allowing uh, I mean, I might sound like a bit like a Chinese legend too, but I mean, sort of allowing the universe just to flow of its own accord. Stop trying to stuff around with it and direct it and manipulate things. Um, you know, and also anticipate. Oh, supposing I was walking along one day and I was in the same position as those two monks. Now, would I rescue that woman or wouldn't I? Just forget about that and just go for your walk, and maybe if you come across a drowning woman, you might do something, or maybe you won't, but that will happen, that will unfold of its own accord at the time. Uh, but we've got this sort of, I think it comes back to possibly our control anxiety. Um, uh, Again, which is a alien cortex thing. I think we could probably even relate this whole thing back to the predicament that we're in at the moment with the collapse of civilization and the ecosphere and everything like that. With the attempt to control has got us into this, and the attempt to control it is probably just going to make it worse now that it's all started.
Yeah, and I get the sense that like a lot of people, because that kind of sense of control is failing and everything seems to be, you know, going to bits. It just creates this like cycle of cynicism, and it just like stultifies any kind of attempt at imagination or look inward. Um, yeah, it's I don't, yeah, I don't like it. I mean, of course it's bad and we're probably all screwed, but you know, I don't abide that cynical attitude. I don't think it's good at all. It's good to be realistic and look at the situation and not have like naive hopes, but I don't think this cynical cycle of just saying, "Oh, we're all dead," and then just like going back to watching TV, like I just don't abide that cynical attitude.
Yeah, because it can be. I think possibly can be difficult to clearly distinguish between that kind of cynicism and just not trying to control things that can't be controlled. Actually, you're reminding me of something. I was reading something, and there is actually I think it's, you know, what you would call a school of art, which is called Russian fatalism, and it is I think it comes from the times of the revolution, around about that stage, and there was a series of artists here would do these drawings of rather resigned figures who didn't have any answers anymore, and uh,
Oh, you mean
the,
the Russian nihilists? Is that what they're called in
yeah,
Russia?
I
Yeah.
think when I read, yeah, Russian nihilists, yeah, I think where I saw it, it was referred to as Russian fatalism, but it's probably the same thing, yeah. And I thought it was interesting just to contemplate that, um, uh, because there seems to be such sometimes a thin margin between, you know, cynicism and nihilism, and 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 still a well, I don't know how you're going to describe this as an acceptance of what's occurring, simply being realistic about it, you know, because again, you know, fatalism is a kind of a refuge. You develop this little mental hideaway in the woods called "my attitude is fatalism," and then go and open the door and go inside it and bar the door up and say, well, this is where I'm going to live during collapse, kind of thing. And you know, I think possibly the problem with that is that it's like every single thing which is a mental construct is that at some point you're not going to be able to uphold it anymore. It's going to collapse on you, and then your little safe ideology or your little safe thought that you're hiding inside is not going to be there, and then you're going to be all exposed to the actual reality of reality. And then what will you do? And you know, possibly that's uh, brings just brings me back to the spiritual notion of dying before you die. And you know, why not, you know, in terms of the mental construct I was just talking about, why not demolish the mental construct now and learn what it's like to be without it, rather than waiting to the point of crisis, which is the worst possible time to be trying to figure out what to do about it. Do it now, do it ahead of time, you know. So I don't know if that makes any sense to you or not.
Yes, it does. And actually, you see, that's what the nihilists or the cynics don't do. They take a shortcut, and they're avoiding that precocious, or that death of the self, actually, and of the ego rather, And I think that is why why he was always shouting Macchio, Macchio. Remember the episode of Bukowski? This is a dead end. And a lot of the people I was referring to earlier who are writing at the moment and very talently or talking very talently about the situation tend either um, to avoid the real issues and themselves looking inside, and also tend to lead people on this path. I think I'm thinking of different writers. I might post them on Reddit that I've read recently who are extremely talented and really have a good analysis of what's going on. But I'm afraid that their readers are going to have this fatalistic attitude that you're describing very well, Gary, about, oh well, I'll just wait for collapse in my little niche.
Yeah,
Is on.
yeah, I think, yeah, and the sad thing about that attitude, I think, is it's a deliberate avoidance of existential questions too. Like, I think it's worth asking like questions like, who am I? Why am I here? What is life? Like, and I don't see people figuring that out. They just kind of, try to go with the assumptions. There's just a bunch of assumptions instead of actually doing that kind of existential exploration, which, as probably anxiety inducing as it can be, is better than just being in a cycle of cynicism. But then again, I'm not sure. Even like, even in some of the last meetings, even Hugh was like, just let them have their fun. Maybe doing what they're doing right now. Other people in various stages of, not accepting collapse or avoiding pain. Maybe that's best for them, and we shouldn't be so judgmental.
Yeah, because you might have to face up to the fact that no matter what you say or do, it's not really going to move them from where they are. Uh, I was just trying to get to another point. Yeah, what you said about, asking questions of, like, who am I and what's all this? And, I think that's where it's such a pity, because you try to broach the subject of spiritual inquiry, for want of a better term, and people, I think sometimes a lot of people are turned off because they imagine this mountain of learning and devotion and to meditative practices and all this kind of thing they've got to do. But um, the other side of it is it's incredibly simple. Because, for instance, you could say to somebody, look, have you ever asked yourself the question, who am I? And of course, the first thing people will try to do is go and think about that. Who am I? Or my name and all the usual things they go to, my identity, or I'm a human being on the planet, and blah blah. Think, and then they and of course, well, if you said to them a simple thing, which is ask yourself, who am I? But don't try to answer the question with any words. Just leave your mind out of it. Just ask, who am I? And do nothing and say nothing and think nothing. And that just, there's a possibility that for some people that will be sufficient to put them out of their alien cortex and possibly even wake some of them up. Uh, but we don't give we seem to give people the complex version of this. I don't know whether it's just my personal take on this, but to me, spirituality, the whole thing's absolutely simple, and the teaching is over in like 30 seconds, and all the rest of it, well, you can go through all that if you want to, but I mean, that might be a way to tackle this issue of the fact that most people just don't get this and aren't drawn to it. And because I've had I guess, no moments of experience that would alert them to it, and also because it just seems to be a daunting undertaking. But you could imagine. In fact, I've seen. I don't know if you've come across Gangaji, who's a spiritual teacher, and he would probably yell Macchio, Macchio at her too. But she just had an interesting technique where she gives these talks, and people are sitting around in the audience. If they want to ask a question, they have to come up and sit next to her on the little raised area, and their question is actually irrelevant. She lets them ask their question and they have a little chat and all the rest of it. But you can see after a while that all this is just completely irrelevant, because what she's trying to do is bit by bit, just lead them to a point where just momentarily their mind stops. And she's watching them very carefully, and she'll know that moment when the person is suddenly stuck for words, where their mind is just can't proceed anymore, and they're experiencing a moment of just no alien cortex. In other words, they've experienced a moment of spiritual awakening. And that simple demonstration of that is the most powerful thing, and it's the most powerful teaching, because that person will go away and they will have had I don't want to describe it as an experience, but they will have realized that this is not the result of a whole lot of learning and dedication and ascetic practices and all the rest of it. They realize it's just something that you can go directly to. And it's terribly simple, and you don't need a library of books or go to an ashram for 20 years and all this kind of thing. And it's just my particular view that it seems to me to be a tragedy that the approach to spirituality isn't put in this incredibly simple, accessible way for people, because you probably would get a lot more people on board with it, by taking that kind of approach. And probably what Hugh is railing against with Macchio is the people who do want to complicate it and turn it into a course and turn it into a major accomplishment and turn it into a big deal and all this kind of thing. Instead of something that is in the end perfectly straightforward, probably because it's just the way we're supposed to be anyway. It's just the natural thing that we somehow lost contact with.
Gary, all that is really interesting. I just observed in the chat that it reminds me, the way you're describing it reminds me of how Taoism characterizes thought. It's kind of a giving in or a letting go.
Yeah, it's like, I think a lot of times what we're doing is with a lot of teaching is we're trying to satisfy the curiosity of the mind. And I think possibly at some stage you've just got to realize that the mind is not going to be part of this, and therefore is it really worth spending much time trying to satisfy the curiosity of it? So the other thing is too, I mean, to be fair, I think, for every different person, there's going to be a different approach to this. And maybe some people do need to be led to it via a path of some kind of extended learning process. And that will work for them. And for other people, it could be entirely off-putting, and I think, oh, this spiritual mumbo jumbo, just it's a load of wallop, I'm not going to go down that pathway. And even you can even see with Hugh, with people who have encountered him from time to time and had quite a bad reaction to him, because in the end he had to present himself somehow or another, and it's it's not going to be a way that's compatible with everybody. Some people will resonate with it and some won't, but you can't be all things to all people in terms of being a spiritual teacher,
Gary, I'm sorry to divert. I have something I wanted to get out. I think I chatted with you about it. To going south. I don't know if you're still there.
Did you want to go back to the climate thing for a while? Do you want
well,
to
I just wanted,
that, or?
if I could, if it's okay. What
Yeah,
do you think?
yes, I think so. Yeah, we've. I think we can leave the spiritual thing, and I agree with you. If you want to,
I just want to get in this. Thanks. That going
yeah,
south.
sure.
I listened to your. I viewed your presentation. I think it was last session or the session before, and I totally agree. And I only have a coda, which is, I was born in 1960. I don't know when what your birth year is, but I've been, I reflected way back when I first encountered the data that I think they began the measurements for the Keeling curve in 1958. And, if you're a scientist, when I was in high school and in college, I learned what the scientific method is, obviously. And, you need a certain amount of data to be statistically significant. So I reflected that 1958 to 68. So by 1968, they had 10 years of Keeling curve of measurements. And it was pretty clear that it was going up. That a key gases in the environment was not steady state, was increasing. And any scientist worth his or her salt would have concluded that something is changing already at a fairly rapid clip. And I think the second point, I would have been 8 years old when the scientific community had the evidence that, well, we've already initiated a change, quite obviously, based again on the fact that the mechanism of change was known by modern science since Svante, Arrhenius, and others almost 100 years before. But then a second milestone, in terms of the scientific method, scientists would reasonably say we need another correlative. In other words, we need another set of measurements from a different source. And that source would come from the ice cores drilling. And ice core drilling began in the 50s, but they did not have the technology to measure accurately the isotopes and isolate them. They didn't have the instrumentation. They couldn't do microscopic gas chromatograph, gas analysis, and so forth until the 70s and 80s. And it was the Greenland sites, and operated mainly by the Europeans, and the Vostok site in the Antarctic, where the ice core work was done. Much of the kind of ice core work that I finally had the instrumentation. I'm going to put the citation here. It's a very
Jason, you're muffled again. Something with your microphone.
There, is that better?
Yeah, it's okay now.
So I've just put an article in the chat. And it is really only by 1980 where they have done the ice cores. It was very difficult. All these countries, European countries and the Soviets, independently and separately, multiple different drilling initiatives, producing the data that today we know, and they all produce very similar data. It's like multiple different scientists. The data all came in the 50s and 80s In 1980, I was 20. Reagan was elected president. The solar panels were ripped off of the roof of the White House from the previous 3 presidents, who actually all had an energy policy. I wouldn't say it's an energy policy that was going to save the planet, but they at least acknowledged it. And 2 were Republicans, Nixon and Ford and Carter. But it was all, ever since 1980, it's been full speed ahead with the most rapacious market capitalism, completely unleashed. And they're angry. They're still, it's completely unregulated now, but they're angrier. The capitalist classes have never been angrier. They've never been freer to do what they want, and they get angrier and angrier, and more rapacious. But pretty much by 1980, if as a scientist you weren't satisfied completely with the now 40 years of data from the Keeling curve, then the data that comes out of these ice cores is responsible for it's not a model, it's actual measurements of where CO2 and many other gases have been, of where temperature has been, and they can analyze the water molecules and see what a lot of this data produced the data about the meridional currents affecting precipitation in Greenland and so forth. So multiple different findings come out of this, not just the CO2 or temperature. And the cake was baked scientifically. The results were in precisely when Reagan comes to office. Any scientist would have said, we now have 2 completely separate objective correlatives of data showing that this gas, the greenhouse gas and other factors are drastically increasing, and that the only explanation is human impact. They're able to control and measure the cosmological impacts, the solar, the radiation, all those cycles. Those have some significance, but there's no way that those cycles are responsible for what's happening. So, the cake has been baked, and I read my high school biology teacher had us all read The Limits to Growth in 1976 or 77, 16 or 17. She was a good biology teacher. This was a book about the fate of the planet, given our current systems. And so I've had, to some extent, limits to growth, an overshoot awareness, and a collapse awareness since I was in public school and high school. I'm just a guy who had a good biology teacher. So, going south, I thought you were absolutely right in saying that pretty much since the 60s or 70s, or at the latest 1980, we've known. And everything else has been a distraction, a refusal, a hiding. The oil industries, the hydrocarbon industries knew this. They had scientists working on this. It's kind of sobering, and I think it just, in some ways, it's we're so further down the path now that I've accepted that there's nothing we're going to do. You can just look at how we're behaving, how the nation states of the world are behaving. They can't agree on even the barest improvements in any part of our human lot here. They can't agree to improve a healthcare system or improve an educational system in any way. So, are they going to take some drastic action on this? No. So I'm at peace with it. I've been at peace with it. I try to help others be at peace with it. So I just wanted to get that off my chest.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it's very good that you brought up the ice cores. That's a big part of it because it verifies the measurements in Hawaii and stuff. And you're totally right. I think what I was doing 3 weeks ago or something, I was just trying to see how far at least we would have to go back. You know, not sort of getting the absolute exact answer, but we'd at least have to go back to the 1980s for the sea ice collapsing, and then further back to find the tipping point for the CO2 concentration, which set everything off. And I don't know if anyone's seen it, but I wrote some kind of argument with Derek Jensen on the R Collapse subreddit during the week, because I was reading his book, A Language Older Than Words, and what I was doing in there that ties in with what you were talking about is that I was trying to find, because the CO2 concentration curve is of course caused by us people, us humans. So I was trying to find what about us humans caused us to go down this road, right? And then in the year 2000, that's when Derek's Language Older Than Words came out. He's suggesting in that book that it was all down to this René Descartes, this French philosopher who came up with the cogito ergo sum, the I think therefore I am. So I was just feeling that Derek Jensen was putting a lot of blame on this one French philosopher to get us into the industrial era and stuff. So it's a long text that I wrote, and I serve up a lot of other sort of turning points in human development. And I think it's really hard to pin down when humans strayed from the ecological path. I think maybe the most objective point would have to be the invention of agriculture. You know, when we started large scale taking over and defining which species of plants and animals were allowed to live here and there. That's a pretty psychotic thing to come up with, you know, compared to what we were doing for 100,000 years before that. But I kind of end up with my Norwegian favorite philosopher, Zapfe, who basically has been saying since the 1930s that the big problem with humans and leading to overshoot and collapse is that we are way too clever for this world. That we are the way we are created, or you know, the way humans are as an animal. We're way too clever with our opposing thumbs and our big brains and stuff, so we would have messed up anyway, you know, no matter the details of world history, we would have gone down this path sooner or later anyway. So, and just interesting to see if we sort of leave the ice tipping points and the CO2 tipping points and go back to human history itself, and trying to find a tipping point for when we lost all senses. You know? I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. That could be an interesting discussion.
Well, I think Hugh's hypothesis is the most convincing, where people were gathering it, like building religious temple sites and starting to trade. And when they started depleting the landscape of animals and stuff, that's when they started agriculture to feed the trading frenzy. And then they were also back then trading probably religious spells and all this other stuff. And then in the Göbekli Tepe video, he talked about how that dynamic went on for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. And then when he hypothesized at Göbekli Tepe specifically, shamans came in and put the party to an end, and sort of had like a first like revolution. And they buried Göbekli Tepe over 3 times because they saw that the trading frenzy pretty much made people inhuman. So yeah, I don't think that yeah, I think that's more convincing, because it makes no sense for hunter-gatherers to suddenly decide to plow a field. There was a reason for it, and I think the trade frenzy makes sense to me, because as we can see with modern capitalism, the market is like, it's a bottomless hole. It will never stop.
Yeah, we are monkeys that like shiny things, and you used to say that a lot. I think it might be interesting also to bring that up if George is interested in having a conversation with us, because in the post on Reddit where he's talking with Michael Dowd, he's more or less saying that basically humans have always been non-ecological beings, and he's kind of got a very he doesn't follow our line of thoughts on that line. He's kind of very fatalistic, and he kind of has discarded the human species. And I think it would be interesting to have a conversation on this. I don't know if that would be constructive, would it bring us to anything, but it would be an interesting subject, maybe to further a little bit what we're talking about at the moment. I see Bob, you're saying
Sophie,
yeah.
Sophie, was it George who said in that interview, I'm just trying to recall it, that we human beings were the only creatures who didn't have any purpose or any reason to be here, or some words to that effect? Is it what he
Yeah.
said in that interview?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I really, uh, you know, I think he was taking too much of a liberty there, because of course, it depends on the manner in which he actually meant that statement. But I mean, supposing you get a monkey swinging in a tree and say, oh, well, okay, well, what's the purpose of that? What's its reason to be here? I think he was throwing something at human beings there that he wasn't making any attempt to substantiate, and which didn't really add anything to the argument, apart from expressing his frustration at our carelessness. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of took exception to that particular point, but there could be something to ask him to elaborate on and see what's behind it.
Yeah, what is the meaning of meaning? Like, why would you?
Well, that's it. I think we
Meaning
discussed
to
this.
exist? I mean, what's this
Yeah,
craving for meaning all the time? It's just like, this is
that's
not
right.
what
Well, I
here in
think
the first place, do you know?
yeah, it is the meaning is meaningless. I think I've got a feeling I mentioned this some time ago, but not just briefly in one of the meetings, that uh, the feeling that meaning is something that comes from outside of a uh, situation, or if you ask what the meaning of something is, it require the meaning comes from somewhere outside of what the thing is. Um, and so, if you take a more holistic view of existence, um, you'll see that there isn't anything outside of it, and therefore, in that sense, it doesn't have any meaning. It just is what it is. So the question of meaning sort of, I guess, presupposes that there's some entity outside, or apart from the thing that you're talking about, which decides what the usefulness of that thing is, and then says, well, yeah, okay, I've decided that this is what the meaning of human beings are. And but from within the system, the human beings just part of the system. And if the system is cosmic, well, you know, the meaning is what the whole thing is its own meaning. I'm probably getting a bit esoteric there. If anyone else wants to make a comment, because after that, I just want to say a couple of things about what Jason referred to. I'll just keep quiet for a minute.
Well, yes, that ties back to what Going South was saying about the French guy, Descartes, je pense donc je suis. That is starts the dissociation. Well, it was already started before, but he stated the dissociation. It ties back again to the parts and the whole. It's the Kantian whole. It's just as soon as you start to come from a perspective of dissociating an element of the system from the system, you're going on a fool's errand.
Yeah, we see the thing with Descartes was
I think,
really. Oh, go on, DB, go on.
yeah, I mean, I'm only hypothesizing here, but I can see like where this psychology starts with like trading with strangers because other people become a means to you getting the end, which is your shiny thing or whatever thing you wanted to trade with. So basically, living things become, you know, the means to the end to satisfy your desires instead of the sort of sharing that other primates do or hunter gatherers do, and that sharing itself sort of reinforces a kind of communal joy. Even in the what was it? Was it Göbekli Tepe or the Escape by Getting Rich? I can't remember, but he talked about how the trading hub in the middle of the city creates a vicious feedback loop of like reptilian brain, hyper reptilian brain, alien cortex, and then the money gets you sex in the city, and then it creates a scenario where you're breeding like a bunch of Gordon geckos.
It's
Yeah,
like
so you can
yeah.
so you can see how the trade that trading with strangers, the psychology behind it leads you there.
Yeah, can I go into because you're talking about Göbekli Tepe's kind of feeding frenzy on the marketplace, which links back, I think, to what Jason mentioned, I think, about the sort of rapacious class that has really swung into action since the 1980s. I just wanted to indulge in a little bit of this seeing we've recovered the word apophenia to just put it into operation here. That you know, you're talking about a little period in history with Reagan ripping the solar panels off, wherever he ripped them off from, and what I was thinking about is that we had like the Club of Rome report, which was sometimes early 70s, the limits to growth, and around about that time, you also had America going off the gold standard, which was the beginning of endless money printing and sort of wealth for free. And I think you could probably make a case for joining all these together. That 1980 might have, around that time, might have been the last possible viable off ramp from terminal ecological destruction in terms of the the atmospheric gas concentrations. But you know, just at about that time or slightly before it, you also invoked kind of the Göbekli Tepe marketplace on steroids, on nuclear power, so to speak. You know, by going off the gold standard, by getting in, by sort of basically just leaving the door open to the most rapacious forms of capitalism and excess. And I think it was about that era, wasn't it, that address that Carl Sagan made? Has anyone seen that on you? Was that like an address to Congress or something that has become quite a historical document? I don't know if anyone's got a date for that they can add in here. I think that was sometime around that same period. So doesn't actually answer Jason's question about when did we become fully aware of this, but it looks just from the sort of assembling all those dates and little bits of information that somewhere like 1970 to 1980 certainly represented the last missing, the last possible exit ramp. And beyond that, we're probably just stuck on this now.
Oh, what you're saying also reminds me of another. I can't remember the document's name that Hugh brought up. It's something to do with like Rockefeller and some of those other like banksters and like military industrial people. But they came up with this like these two versions of society going forward. I can't remember if it came out in the 70s or 80s, but one was like the normal, oh, we basically deindustrialize and people go doing like pastoralism and stuff like that, or we do lockstep. And they chose, and Hugh said they chose lockstep because in order to actually, do things that are healthy for the planet and, you know, human health and all that, the elites would have to give up power because the like what people don't understand is the market system and currency, that is the crucible of their power. That son of a bitch is the crucible of their power. They're not gonna freaking take a wrench and start unscrewing it and then just give up their palaces.
This came up.
Yeah, they're sucking like the whole energy out of every human body, by exploiting labor, and building their projects and keeping their comfort going. Yeah, so there's no way, like.
Yeah, you could have a point there because I was putting together two things. Sophie got me onto a news channel called the Duran, Duran, and they interviewed Sophie. What was the name of that American fellow they interviewed just recently? Robert somebody or other. Do you remember his name?
No, I can't remember his name. It's actually
Anyway, if
Bob put me onto
anyone wants,
actually, you might know Bob the name of that guy. I don't know if you listen. I don't even know. Did
yeah.
you post it to Reddit or not? I have it somewhere.
Yeah, it was. It's on a Reddit post. I put it on a Reddit post. You can follow up this particular interview, but I want to refer to something in that interview and also in one of Kevin McCann's long rambling carry-on talks that he does, and both of them pointed back to what DB's just been saying about this choice to choose lockstep, because in the fellow in the Duran, basically, it was an extremely good discussion. It's worth listening to, and he basically said that he really felt that in order to stay in power, that the American government would, if they needed to, escalate this to a full scale war. In other words, Biden knows that he's probably going to lose the next election, and the only way he can save himself is probably by going into the war government kind of position where he can remain there. And the other thing that was I just wanted to set next to that was Kevin McCann talking, and he was exploring the bio research labs in Ukraine, of which there are some number, and the United States has got a finger in the pie of the lot of them by the sound of it, and have had for quite some time, certainly since they installed Zelensky's government at any rate. And apparently the information coming out of there is that what they have been up to is of such a serious nature that that these people would basically, to create a smokescreen for themselves and save themselves, would actually also, you know, basically McCann's words were that these people would torch the world to cover for what they've been doing, so that nobody found out about it. And again, this also this implies what DB was saying, that this sort of lockstep to doom, that we're going to go down these incredibly hard pathways because they sort of they all preserve the hegemony of the elites and the power manipulators behind the scene. So it's very interesting to sort of pick up that message from two completely different directions, uh, and just make a bit of a connection there.
Yeah.
I posted. Oh, sorry. Go on, DB.
Yeah, and another good. I mean, have any of you seen the Untold History United States documentary? Has anyone heard of that one?
No, she
Oh,
posted
okay.
it. Find it. Yeah.
Is that in the film archives on YouTube? Because they've got very interesting videos on the history of the U.S.
Yeah, I'll post it. So basically, what he's going over is basically like how the banksters and the corporations have like owned America since the mid 1800s, and it's basically what it says, the untold history. So like what no one learns in their history textbooks in high school. Basically, a really rapacious, psychopathic, conservative ruling class has always presided over America. And in every instance, almost, they've made monstrous decisions that have killed, millions of people. And then especially that, I didn't know this before, but that whole nuking of Japan thing, that whole myth of that saving millions of American soldiers was like bullshit. They did some underhanded crap to deceive, because they kept the Soviet Union signature off of a paper, which was what scared Japan into surrendering right off the bat, just so they could nuke Japan and flex their muscles at the Soviet Union, because that's how paranoid the reactionary ruling class was of communism.
Yeah, that was shocking. I didn't know about that until very recently.
So don't
apparently, apparently the Japanese had already said that they would surrender, and they just ignored it and just kept going.
Yeah, so the lesson there is, don't underestimate the lengths those people will go to stay in power. Like, don't underestimate it.
This is the thing. This is what's so shocking, because this is just so far in excess of what most ordinary people would be able to contemplate within themselves. That I think they doubt that these people will go that far. It just seems so like so many orders of magnitude beyond what most people will be capable of, that you think, hang on, is this excessive? But I guess you can only probably counter that by saying things like what you've just said, is go back a little bit in history and say, well, hey, they did it here and they did it here and they did it here, and and it looks like they're still doing it.
Yeah, as usual, the desiderata are seeing everything and nobody is. No, I'm joking, but the name I posted, that American guy, Robert Barnes, I've actually visited his website or his Substack, or I don't know what, but he has a lot to say about. He's quite a good speaker too. But it's the same thing with, I sent Gary actually, and I might post it. I don't know, I'm not sure. A long writing by an Irish writer, John Waters, and all describing what you're talking about. The elites, the whole thing. And we're going back to where we were earlier in the conversation. Most of these guys have got blinders when it comes, number one, to the climate, and number two, to human agency and all that, human's role in it, and also they're avoiding certain issues. It's just really
this seems to be typical of the right. It's funny, I was only thinking about that last night. I was reading the local newspaper here, and there was an article listing, because there's a federal election coming up, and the article was listing all of the minor parties, and there were lots and lots of them, like, at least a dozen, probably more, of these really small parties who are contending, and I'm reading down the little list of them, and almost all of them were right-leaning parties, and every one of them had exactly what you're referring to. They had some things were spot on, and they really seemed to understand it, but then they would just go off onto this irrational stuff. That the climate crisis doesn't exist, or that I don't know. Um, I just, things like, that no form of social security is necessary, or that we've got to gear up to fight the Chinese come what may, and all this stuff. They would just go off onto these things that were completely irrational, and yet set next to that, like this fellow Robert Barnes, um, who makes perfect sense and talks really well in a certain along a certain channel, and it seems to be rather schismatic the way they operate, uh, almost to the extent that I began to wonder whether they were only making sense on a particular narrow channel of thought just to simply bait people and get support, but they didn't actually believe in it themselves. They didn't even believe that in themselves. Uh, kind of, uh,
Yes, it's the disconnect, Gary, and
yeah, the disconnect. Yeah,
Kevin
yeah,
is in the same league. You remember the conversation we had with him and Hugh? Um, it was the sun cycles. A lot of the right is onto that, and
yeah.
also the fabrication of the climate fear, so that the industry is going to develop more green technology. So that's why they're inventing the climate change theory. You know, this permeates an enormous amount of talks that I listen to or read, and it's just that missing link. If the moment you step into stating that the climate situation, or whatever you call it at the moment, you immediately alienate all these people, because they've taken it out of their scope. They just don't go there, whether for
Well, the thing
political
is,
reasons.
it has the same effect on you as a listener too, I think, because you're following along with something they're saying that makes very good sense to you, and then suddenly they change track onto this, and you sort of think, well, hang on for a minute, you know, uh, can I believe anything else that this person is saying? If they're the bit that I thought where they were making sense, should I have? Um, what was behind that? It was my question of a minute ago. So were they really making sense, or are they just extremely good at mouthing something to get you onto the rest of their agenda? I suppose it's my tendency to mistrust the situation.
Yeah, I think
Um,
it has a lot to do with identity politics. I think that these people are belonging to certain groups or school of thoughts, and it has to do with that. The moment you join a type of a sort of tendency or group or political allegiance, you go into their speech and their agenda, and you don't go on the. You see, I think when we touched the climate issue with Alison McDowell, that's where the real problem happened. It was not the ARG and the ideas of Hugh and his talk about violence, non-violence. It was that there's more. There's on the left too, on the left and the right. There are people who have identified so much with certain groups that they will not go into certain subjects. It's not just a psychological resistance. I think it has to do with identity politics.
yeah, there was. I wish I could remember what the reference to it was, but there was a talk I was listening to, maybe Chris Hedges, I'm not sure, where he was saying that the Republican Party basically adopted a policy of of whatever the Democrats suggested or stood for, they would vote against it and speak against it and deny its validity, regardless. It didn't matter if it made perfect sense and it was absolutely reasonable. They would just simply do it as a political strategy. That whatever the lefts or the Democrats were suggesting, and so that would automatically include, no matter what they might have thought of climate change, even if they were willing to entertain it at all, that they still would have denied it just on the grounds of maintaining a united brick wall against the opposition, and so you get into these ridiculous situations, and then of course, you know, other people who are aligned, more aligned with the right, I guess they just absorb that and say they don't realize it's just being done for a cynical political purpose. They absorb that as being, oh, these authority figures are saying that this is rubbish, and therefore, therefore I have to believe that it's rubbish too. They don't realize that that's not the reason, not necessarily the reason why the particular thing was being denied. Um, so you get into
Well,
this frightful morass. I think that's where
Yeah,
Robert Barnes' talk was. Sorry, DB, I'll finish. I think that's where Robert Barnes' talk was particularly good, because in that it was very easy to get a picture of the absolute morass of political chicanery that's going on. You really got a good glimpse into that cesspit listening to him. Sorry, DB, go ahead.
yeah. One of the things I was going to say that will probably help us understand that phenomenon. So, I think the most useful thing Noam Chomsky did for us was, well, he wrote it with this other guy, this book called Manufacturing Consent. I think the other guy that helped write it was like some guy called Ed Herman or something. Noam Chomsky and Ed Herman. And they did for the last filter of the media system. And the old version of the book was just anti-communism, because America's ruling class is super paranoid about communism. But they amended the book because they thought that the anti-communism, because I think that's the most important filter, the fifth filter of the media system. So they amended that and said it's not anti-communism because that's too narrow. They said the fifth filter is whoever the media trains you to hate. So the liberal media is teaching the people who buy into the liberal ideology to hate the conservatives, and then they give them all these like psychological reasons to stir them up to hate them, and then the Fox News or whatever Republican media stirs up the conservative people or Republican people, and manipulates all their emotions to hate the liberals, and then blame them for why society is going bad and vice versa. And so they never talk and they never find a common ground. It's just like voting against each other because it's this irrational
Yeah,
fear, a total fear, and people are not seeing each other's humanity. They're living in this intellectualism. It's the alien cortex trying to put everything in the box, so to speak, instead of opening up, letting the universe in, letting other people in, and trying to find what do you call it? A kind of consensus reality, a cosmic context to understand what's actually going on. It's just you can smell the fear. It's not good.
But
yeah, it's all retreated.
sorry, I just say when you said that, I think there's a darker reason behind all this. The deafening silence of the people who are got platforms on YouTube and various other ones who don't approach the climate thing. I think it's all part of this that they know, not the people who are talking, but the people who are trying to do this managed extinction and who are completely trying to implement their transhumanist agenda and all that, because they know and they want us to go down as slaves, and they are going to silence anything by manipulating, whether by political means or financial means, anything that would put people in front of the reality of the extinctions, of the the disappearance of ecosystems, of not just the climate, but of that everything on our Earth that's going to shit. And I think this deafening silence is created knowingly, and unfortunately, a lot of those people like Kevin or John Barnes, and maybe unwittingly, are carrying on the agenda of those elites and various powers that be, that know since the limit to growth, and that things are going down, and there's no need to go any further. I think it's that is what is happening, and we will be screaming in the desert, I think, when we keep talking about this, because no main platforms or medias will look at deep green resistance is working for more than 20 years on this. The Monkey Wrench Gang was written in the 70s, I think, was it, or the 80s? I can't remember. I mean, all these things that we cherish and know and read and everything, they never got to the mainstream. They just won't. They won't.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, go ahead, going south.
Yeah, I would just like to say to Gary before everyone forgets about it. I was just going to comment that the right that you were talking about, the right is actually correct in that the left on climate is talking rubbish or whatever you called it, because if you analyze what the left or politicians in general who so-called believe in climate are saying about it, they're like net zero in 2070, and we have to cut carbon emissions by half by 2030, that kind of stuff, which are all good, but it's like 50 or 100 years too late. So it's like some of the words they use may not be wrong per se when they talk about climate. It's just that their whole framing and their packaging and their solutions and stuff and their time frames are totally out of whack. So that the whole thing ends up being just a big lie, or just a big what do we call that? Just a big false
like
hope.
Subterfuge. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you.
A false hope that we still have agency and it's still not too late to do something. Yeah.
No, I quite agree with you. I was only making the point so far as just denying the existence of climate change. I really didn't mean it to be going any further. It's quite true what you say, that the left does not have any kind of solution or realistic view of it, but that at least they do acknowledge that there's some phenomena occurring, and I only meant the point just that far.
Yeah, but it's very. I think it's very amusing that even where we can concede that the left does understand that there is a quote climate problem, even there they are wrong, because from the Gaia hypothesis, the Gaia theory, with the Earth taking care of itself, as a superorganism, it's actually not a problem but a solution, and the problem is human overshoot, right? So even there, where we can accept that, the left in politics has understood that we have a climate problem, even that is wrong.
Yeah, you're quite right. I mean, I guess it just comes down to the fact that if you only listen to the right, there will be absolutely nothing in that realm at all to talk about, and the left might have a totally distorted, just as a general statement, what you're pointing out, a totally distorted view of the whole thing. But at least there is a subject there that people could begin, rather than just nothing. Sophie, we're getting really near the end of the time. Do you want to finish or keep? Does anyone want to keep talking and do the third? You have to restart the record.
The recording is
Otherwise,
maybe.
yeah, it's going to end.
Yes, it's been long. It's been 2 hours. I think I would like.
All right. Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, but well,
could-
there is one more thing. Maybe it's when it comes to like the left and the right aisles of the political. Yeah, it's the right wing is probably in total denialism about the situation, and with the left, I either get the feeling that they don't understand or they are what do you call it? Lying by omission.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, can't be portrayed in a simplistic way, but okay. So we just want. Oh, going south.
Oh, well, this is leaving us with an awful lot of other avenues that we may be able to explore when we get more people on and interviews like overshoots, like climate denial and all that, because we're going to be exchanging with people who it might be interesting to discuss these things. So yes, maybe we can just stand still and
yeah, and going south. If you want to resume that discussion next week, where we just were on the left. So yeah, we'll just take 30 seconds to be quiet and okay. Well, thanks everybody for coming along. That was pretty good meeting. I've got a feeling it might have been a pretty good
one.
meeting.
That was a good one. Thanks everybody.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Bye bye then. Thank